Thank you all for coming to this first discourse that is sponsored by the Institute for Critical Social Theory, a new institute that Syed Javed and I have put together to expand our ability to collaborate with other scholars on issues that are affecting us all, right, through a critical perspective. So that this discourse is going to be sponsored by us. It'll later be put on YouTube for everybody else to listen to and hopefully learn something from. It's also sponsored by the publishing house Discourse Press, which is also specializing in books that are critical in nature, coming from an interdisciplinary background. And so this discourse is called Weltschmerz, a discourse on the global condition. The problems that we have today, the modern problems that are affecting the entire world, is what we want to discuss today from a critical perspective. And so my name is Dr. Dustin Bird. I'm an associate professor of philosophy and religion at Olivet College, and I'm also the co-director of the Institute for Critical Social Theory and the editor-in-chief of Discourse Press. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my dear brother, Syed Javed.
Thank you very much, Dustin. Yes, very happy to be here, and hello to everybody and all those who are going to listening and watching us later on. Well, you know, the idea of this discourse and this roundtable came when I was discussing with a friend of mine who is now here, Professor Turaj Gilbert Moradi, who is a psychoanalyst. He raised the question and asked me, why do we feel so bad today? I said, what do you mean? Do you mean like feeling bad now, today? No, he said, no, why don't we feel good here in Iran? And it was really very funny because accidentally that day I was talking with a friend of mine who is in Germany. She's a professor in Hamburg, and she was complaining about the state of affairs there, and she was telling, you know, every day people are like getting ill, affected by this virus, and there are many people who don't want to get vaccinated, and at home we don't feel very well. It's like depressing conditions, depressing situations. Then I was talking with another friend of mine in England, and another friend in Africa, another one in India. I said to Dr. Moradi, this is not only something Iranian, it seems it's global. But why do we feel bad? He was asking me. Why should we feel at this moment, at this juncture of history in the world, why people don't feel happy? Then I discussed this with a friend, with my friend and colleague and brother Dustin J. Bird, and he said, why don't we talk about that? And he actually like conceptualized and gave a very interesting concept, Weltschmerz, that's why people don't feel good. What are the reasons? So now we are here trying to explore and reflect and ponder upon this question. Really, what's wrong? Is it like a psychological issue? Is it a social issue? Is it political issue? Is it related to environmental changes? Or is it something that we have to explore? Now I give the floor to Mary Shariati, and hope you can start your talk. Each of us has between 15 to 20 minutes to deliver his speech or his thesis, or maybe 10 minutes, then 5 minutes we can get engaged on these issues. The floor is yours.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Thank you, Syed, for organizing this. This is terrific. Your energy is certainly unsurpassed. I mean, you guys are wonderful. And I tell you, I think that's a wonderful question as to why people feel so down and so desperate really for an answer. And I really don't have all the answers. However, I can look at it holistically. I said that a big part of it is because of the socioeconomic condition and the social, economic, and political and environmental consequences of decisions made by people in decision-making apparatuses. And I thought I just talked about the environment a little bit, if you don't mind. I presented, to be honest with you, I presented a portion of this somewhere else a while back, so I modified it. But it still is the concern. That is, what is really happening with our ecosystem, our environment? What is the relationship between people in this context? Who's supposed to be worried about the environment? Should I expect poor people who are struggling every day to make a living, day in, day out, struggling to be concerned with the environment, or they have their own priorities? And the academia, is it the corporate leaders? Is it politicians? Who is supposed to decide that we've had enough? And how far can we move it away from politicization of this problem? That is, that it seems to become a political issue that people use in the context of the U.S. and elsewhere as a strategy, as a technique, as a ploy to get elected. So what I'm going to do is to share with you my screen. And I have, let's see, I'm not really very tech savvy here. Let's see. Share a PowerPoint, and I changed the title. The previous title was the Green New Deal. Remember the Green New Deal, Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, who thought she was going to really make a difference in changing policies. And so I changed that, the Green New Deal, to Our Fragile Planet. And, you know, as I was preparing for this one, for this audience, of course, and for my colleagues here, and I thought alienation perhaps is the critical concept here. And I was browsing through Ali Shariati's work, and, you know, he made references to Lao Tzu and Confucius, and of course, before that, he mentions the myth of Prometheus and the myth of Sisyphus. And one way or another, I saw a connection between the environmental concern, the human condition, where are we going, the crisis of civilization, and of course, the current reality. That it seems it is an ongoing concern that we've had, and it has certainly intensified throughout in a modern time, at the present time, in the past 3-4 decades, but it certainly has always been a problem. Of course, by ecosystem, again, we're going to look at it as a community of self-sustaining organisms, that when there is one malfunction, then it affects the rest of the system, you know, and there are people who argue that ecosystem is like a spaceship. Once we lose it, we've lost it, it's gone for good. And it's that critical that we have to pay attention. We have to practice sustainability. Ali Shariati comes and says, yeah, the machine is not the problem. Oftentimes we tend to point the finger at the machine, but it is machinism that is the problem. People are in charge of the machine. People in charge of the technology, that is the organized use of tools, that are making bad decisions that affects everybody across time and space. And of course, the economic system, capitalism. Some people describe capitalism as an economic system as a cancer on the planet, that it has commodified everyday life without any end in sight. And because of commodification, because of this pursuit of endless pursuit of profit, therefore, we have really misplaced everything, including love for each other, for our environment, for our societies, culture, respect, and direction. We've lost direction because other people decide. So the point is then, the world, before we get to the rest of this, that decommodification and dematerialization with a purpose to develop humanity or channel the energy of humanity towards something that is self-sustaining. And the only way we can do that is to decommodify. In other words, to remove the profit motive. Not entirely, but the profit motive as is, as it presents itself. And by removing that, therefore, we can really change the production process, the distribution process, and labor capital relations. Of course, the beginning of all the concerns that we have with the environment, we can say we could narrow it to, let's say, industrial revolution. Before that, we had, the first industrial revolution of 18th century to the early part of the 19th century. The reason I mentioned the first industrial revolution, because right now we're on the fourth industrial revolution. This is something I discuss in the context of a paper I did on China. And the first industrial revolution, of course, was the beginning of realization that there is a problem with the way we conduct our affairs, with the way we live our life, and the way we produce our goods and services. Capital labor antagonism at all-time high, of course, manifested by the Luddites, people who were really opposing capital because of the misplacement, because of the attitude toward labor as an expendable commodity that could be replaced with machine. Luddites were not just some crazies that went out there and broke machineries in order to make a point, or they were anti-technology. They were really a group of conscious people with consciousness. People were aware and conscious of what was really happening. So this growing antagonism continued on. Of course, we can see the 19th century as sometimes it's called the century of revolution. And added to this, of course, capital labor antagonism was the rise of unsanitary and crowded urban industrial centers. So here we have the intellectuals in Europe react to this by calling it, sometimes they call it a blessing, sometimes call it a curse. We know, of course, people like Auguste Comte decided this is wonderful because now it means the supremacy of science. And there were others, of course, who were not so sure. Karl Marx questioned the whole production process, which was good. But then again, the question was, how does a socialist or a communist technology look like as compared? But what his intent was to show that it is really not the presence of machine itself, but how the industrialists, the capitalists use the machine in order to create an environment in which they can decide for the planet. So we have mercantilism, of course, as an economic system that really enabled the Industrial Revolution to progress, but at the expense of buying things cheap and selling them expensive. Were very much involved in colonialism, and of course, capitalism itself again came under scrutiny. Some people trying to rescue capitalism, of course, and the literature, of course, is vast that we can't really get to that. Now, the concern for the environment, of course, is nothing new. We know that this has intensified in recent decades because of the fact that we see things. We see pollution in the air. We see the presence of child labor. We see plastics in the oceans, and on and on. But let me just give you an idea about how significant the environment has been for the pioneers in this country, in the US. These were first generation or second generation immigrants who came to this country. They went to places, pristine places like Wyoming and Montana and Colorado, and then they decided that, my God, we got to preserve this. Now, back then, of course, there wasn't nothing of sort that you would consider a damage to the environment. But all of these individuals knew that if the production process, the abuse of nature continues, we're gonna be sorry at the end of the road. So we got people like Rachel Carson with her wonderful book, Silent Spring, and then of course there are a lot of other people that were primarily reacting to irresponsible commercial exploitation of nature. Of late, we also have people who consider ecological civilization should be the end, should be the goal of the economic system around the world, the political structure around the world. Eileen Kress, of course, documents a variety of things we all know about. The increasing number of people on the planet, a planet that is only 71% or 29% land and 71% water, that we don't have all the resources to sustain. And there were other people, of course, who were like talking about actually the sixth extinction. Elizabeth Colbert is one of them. The point being that we beginning to see a new realization that we can't continue business as usual. In fact, there are CEOs of big corporations who are beginning now to talk about a natural capitalism, a humane capitalism, social capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, they beginning to realize that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way we approach the environment, our own environment, and therefore something must be done to change that. The question is, what is to be done? I mentioned, the Greek mythology, that there's something that's been around for many, many centuries. The respect for the environment has been around in all ancient civilizations. Because we had nothing else really to rely on. Persians have 12 months of the year. Each month is named after one angel, one goddess that is really supposed to protect something. Aban is for water, Alzar is for fire, and on and on and on. And we see these in all these ancient civilizations. Taoism, for instance, which somebody called it the essence of environmentalism, also emphasizes that Mother Nature must be respected. We saw that in the case of Native Americans. We saw in the case of African civilization. If it wasn't for colonialism, probably Africans and the Andes and Asians could have prevented perhaps a great amount of damage to the environment. And by the way, that's something we need to probably think about, maybe the link between colonialism and environmental degradation now. I think there is ample evidence to suggest that that area, there is some literature on that, not much, but it really needs to be worked on. All religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all have directives encouraging the statements, and or an Islamic religion called Hadith regarding the environment, the treatment of environment. In fact, it is you don't waste. You don't waste. That is a directive in Islam in particular. Catholics have the Catholic priest who is the saint who is responsible for the environment, protection of the environment and animals, St. Francis. And so the question is, it's not that we have just walked into this crisis. People warned us about all of these that we could be facing in the future. Today, we have, of course, a growing awareness of the environmental concerns. We have the environmental protections that, agency in this country, of course, that is very much politicized, sadly. We have a great number of organizations. Some are on the very radical left that in fact, they use Marx, who relied on great German chemist, Justus von Liebig, and the idea of metabolic rift. This is in the 19th century, of course. Metabolic rift was really a reformulation by John Bellamy Foster of Marx's theory of environment. Metabolic rift is really just that crisis in the environment that if it's not tended to, then is going to cause considerable damage to human societies. And these are some of the groups, by the way. Greenpeace is the biggest of all. In Germany, tried to become a party, or it is a party. I'm not sure how much impact they've had in the political process, trying to change that. Islamic environmentalism, global Catholic climate movement, by the way, initiated by Pope Francis. recently, and few others, by the way. They're all radical Marxist, materialist philosophers, etc. But certainly within the religious community that emphasizes ethical considerations and spirituality as a solution to the environmental crisis that we have. Just to, you all know this. Look at this. This humanity should not live like this. And look at these children. They can't breathe the air. And somebody in China, I believe it's in China, somebody said, if you can't breathe the air, what good would it do how much money you have? And this is the reality of what we have right now around the world. And another ugly reality, there are some 4.3 million deaths due to indoor air pollution. Indoor air pollution, just the indoor air pollution. And then here we have, of course, the water crisis. 71% of the surface is water, and from that, only 1% is suitable for human consumption. And then not only that, now we have a conflict, many conflicts brewing around the globe. The global hotspots from Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, okay, because of the dam on Blue Niles, and in Pakistan, in Iran, in Nigeria, in India, Iraq. Manifestation of this conflict, of course, was Syria and Yemen, because of control over water, because of devastation due to drought, but also, of course, mismanagement and sending the troops instead of sending solutions. Privatization, of course, has been an issue. There are places in the world that, because they're indebted to international monetary and global banking system finance, they have erected barriers around the pool of rainwater, and then they charge those people for that. Just think about how terrible the crisis, level of crisis is. That even rainwater is not privatized, and people have to buy that. When if you don't have the money, of course, that's just too bad. Anyways, and on top of that, of course, notice though, this is the reality that most of the people in the global South live with, the pollution. And that's where they get their money. And the waterborne diseases, airborne diseases. Over 1 billion people, 13% of the world's population, lack access to safe water. 4 million annual deaths due to water pollution. Over half of the world's population is water insecure. They don't know where the next jug of water is going to come from. In Mexico, for instance, there are these trucks that deliver water, the tankers deliver water to different places there. Yet at the same time, Coca-Cola has privatized the good water in Mexico and sells it. Isn't that interesting that one of the CEOs, Fox, was the president of Mexico? Coca-Cola company had one of the CEOs. Anyway, these are sadly the issues that we really can't resolve, but that is happening. Those are all symptoms of a larger problem. Traditional use and abuse of water. And then the production process continues to wreak havoc on the water supply. Do we really need to produce a pair of jeans that uses, I believe, uses 1,800 gallons of water? This is from sources from Tree Huggers and others. That I use in my textbooks in economics, and look at the amount of water that each of these products use. Rice, 403 gallons, olives, 520, chocolate, 2,847 gallons of water. You can see that, and of course, this is the production process that has no regard for the environment. It seems there is nothing here that suggests any kind of sustainability. If we grow cucumbers and potatoes and cabbages and tomatoes and lettuce, of course, we've got very few, there's very little need for water. I beg your pardon, I think I said 1,800 gallons. Yeah, 1,800 gallons for a pair for the cotton that is used in the production of jeans, and 400 gallons to produce one cotton shirt. And so this madness is not the ordinary Joe that decides or responsible for. Don't ask poor people to come up with a solution, even think about that, because like I said, they have much more serious problem with the everyday survival. At least 14 million tons of plastic ended up in the ocean every year. Right? 80% of all marine debris found in the surface of water and deep sea sediments. And in the speaking of course, the water shortages and drought and pollution, now we have the drought. There is so much talk about all of these great unwashed that are moving toward the US border with Mexico from Central America because they just, they want to have a better life, but they really don't address the push factors that exist. Now, I'm not talking about gangs of gangsters and drug dealers and others. By the way, that's also a function of a direct result of global capitalism and the way it's practiced in particular Central America, with its long history of being a banana republic. How degrading that is, insulting that is, banana republic. So there is the corridor of drought. You see that these people are lifted from the ground. These people they much rather stay in their villages and little towns than to move and to move forward, to move towards the north, because that's where the hope is that that's where they can find some livelihood. Drought leaves up to 2.9 million hungry in Central America. This is
you have 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay.
Yeah.
1 minute. So, and then of course there is the desertification in Africa and forced migration. Also, we see it. We hear it in Europe. That these Africans are moving towards Europeans. They're drowned along the way, some of them. But this is a crisis that we have to deal with it. Some 3,704 fires in 2019, 30% higher than the one in year 2012. And look at the ugly reality that we have created for these children. Look at them. These are all child labor, and the children who are working sometimes for 20 cents a day. And the boomerang, all the deaths, and they're all there. Millions of people are dying because of all diseases related directly to the environment. And of course, then in this context, we also have some countries that are called the happiest countries in the world. Some actually governments have Ministry of Happiness, like Bhutan. And some countries like England, 2018, had Ministry of Loneliness because people were feeling so lonely and down. But then again, those are all treating the symptoms, not the problem itself. What are the causes of the problem? The optimist, partial rating here is, there are some people who believe that there is nothing wrong really with the environment, with the planet. We can bounce back. The cornucopians in particular, criticizing Malthusian argument that somehow we have to be careful. Energy and civilization, Noah Harari, the Sapiens, all of these things very much Eurocentric, but also, of course, not addressing the real concern. You can go back in history, talk about all that, but then again, the current reality, of course, tells you something different. And of course, we have technology that we can really make a difference. Thank you. Sorry for going over. Thank you
very much. We will get back to this discussion later on as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Now the floor is for Professor Rudolf Siebert. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dustin, for organizing our group today. Our theme is Weltschmerz, and this is a concept which comes from German Romanticism, and poets like Mörike or composers like Bruckner. So the Romantic movement, which was not only opposed to classicism, but it was also opposed to all what we just heard, to the industrialization process, to the bourgeois enlightenment. So it wanted to rescue issues from the past, but it was particularly concerned with human suffering. So I think that the real source for Weltschmerz is the old problem of theodicy, and I would like to say a few things about this. The theodicy means the defense of God's justice in the face of the horror and terror in this world as nature and man, and we just have heard some of this catastrophe and disaster which people are suffering from today and have suffered for quite some time. The theodicy was the beginning of all theology, particularly in the Greek world, in the ancient Greek world. And theology was, first of all, theodicy, the defense of the gods and of God against this disaster under which people have to suffer. Our deacon, Joe, in our student parish here at Western Michigan University, still does theodicy when he starts every sermon with God is good. And the community then answers, God is good. Recently, the deacon was terribly beaten up by people in the parking lot and had to be brought into the hospital. But a few weeks later, he started again his sermons with God is good and did not ask where was God when he needed him, the theodicy question. Jesus himself asked in his discourse with a young rich man, why do you call me good? Only one is good, God in heaven. But during his execution, Jesus asked with Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is the theodicy question. The psalm ends more optimistically, but Jesus did not get to the end of the psalm. Crucifixion caused a fatal heart attack. That was not always so. There were dualistic Manichaean theologies separating the Hebrew Bible with its bad God from the New Testament with its good God, like Ahura Mazda and Ahriman in the Persian religion, or like Mithras fighting the bull in so many altars along the Rhine River, the Danube, and in southern England, where we see this image of Mithras. Later on, theodicy moved into the background. Theology became more positive and did not want to talk about the theodicy problem any longer. Theologians did not want to talk about it. After the catastrophic 20th century, we must talk about it nevertheless. And theologians like Metz and Küng and Moltmann discussed it with the Marxist philosopher Bloch, who always emphasized that the 10,000 slaves which were executed with Spartacus, that none of them was resurrected. In some religions, it may be blasphemy to raise the theodicy question. Certainly not in Judaism, as the religion of sublimity. There is Psalm 22, and there is the book Job. Also not in Christianity, the religion of becoming freedom and full manifestation, as Jesus' last words show. But maybe in Islam, the religion of law, the theodicy question may be taboo. In the 1980s, my friend Walter Dirks refused to publish a whole issue of his Frankfurter Heft, a journal, a left-wing Catholic journal, on the theodicy problem, when his co-editor, Eugen Kogon, the author of the SS State, wanted to do so. There was a conflict between the friends. There were tears even. Kogon had been in Buchenwald for 7 years. Dirks had been in internal emigration. He was hiding in Germany during the Nazi time after having been in prison because of his battle against fascism. Dirks believed that man had a right to happiness, also if he had not been in a concentration camp like Kogon. When I told my friend, the great Canadian theologian Gregory Baum, shortly before his death, that my son Steve had died from cancer, like his mother Margie and his grandfather Bruno before, and that thus we as a family faced once again the theodicy problem, he reminded me that in all my books, I always blamed nature rather or man for the suffering in the world, not God. That was true. Gregory also did not want to talk about the theodicy problem. He was too optimistic. But if God created the world and governed it, as the revelations say, the world, he was also responsible for it and what happened in it. There was no way around this. When I came to Frankfurt once from the civil war in Yugoslavia, I went to confession in the Capuchin church in Frankfurt. I started out with telling the father confessor, a Capuchin monk, about my war experiences, the 200,000 murdered people in a war instigated by Germany, the Vatican, and the CIA, through mobilizing the nationalisms against each other, which the self-management socialists had tried to reconcile. I asked the monk where his boss was in all of this. God was in the bloody war among the Slavs, the Serbs, the Croats, the Slovenians, the Montenegrins, the Bosnians. That was the theodicy problem at the time. The father confessor did not know the name theodicy, but he knew the problem and pointed to the fall of man and to the cross as solution. We must take the cross upon ourselves for redemption and reconciliation. One of the last great theodicies was written by Leibniz about the goodness of God, the freedom of man, and the origin of evil. He came up with and asserted that the present world was the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire, the great bourgeois enlightener, laughed Leibniz out of the court with his Candide. It is still played on the stage today. Once asked by priests in Kalamazoo to attack it, I was not able to. Voltaire was right. In modernity, the bourgeois, Marxian, and Freudian enlightenments emphasized the theodicy more than the believers and against the believers. There was, however, the critical theorist Theodor Adorno, non credo, I do not believe, against the incomplete manifestation and revelation in Christianity. He waited for a more complete revelation with less contradictions. But even Adorno had to admit that the Johann Sebastian Bach's St. Matthew Passion Play could not be entirely untrue. Voltaire and his co-enlightener Rousseau invented the bourgeois deism as an attempt to solve the theodicy problem. God had simply left the world after he had created it, mainly to the bourgeoisie to do with it whatever it wanted to, colonialism, imperialism, world wars, without any concern for the Mosaic Decalogue or the Jesuanic Sermon on the Mount or the Golden Rule, which is valid in all world religions. At this moment in world history, January 2022, the Biden administration violates the Golden Rule when it claims the Monroe Doctrine only for itself, but does not grant something similar to the Russian Federation concerning the Ukraine, which has been taken over by fascist oligarchs. Hegel enjoyed the laughter of Voltaire about Leibniz' all too optimistic theodicy, but he also discovered the dialectic of enlightenment and the decay of the bourgeois enlightenment into positivism. It is as it is. The glass is still half full. Positivism discovers the facts, but forgets to ask the question if they are good or bad, and if they maybe should be changed. Hegel also renewed Leibniz's theodicy with the help of his notion and reality dialectic. Hegel saw the slaughter bench of world history, the Golgotha, as brutally as his archenemy Schopenhauer, who cursed his optimism. After Hegel had faced the historical slaughter bench in his philosophy of history, he suggested a shift of consciousness from the a posteriori position to the a priori position, position which science forbids us to take. to the reason of Parmenides, or the providence of the psalmists and the prophets, the reason and the providence which governed the world and negated its negativity and functionalized it through the cunning of reason with internal necessity toward the ultimate realm of freedom. That was consoling. That was indeed the theological optimism which Schopenhauer had cursed. Marx kept the idea of internal necessity, in spite of the fact that it was metaphysical and idealistic, but for him also with inner necessity, the historical movement moves toward the realm of freedom. Hegel's optimistic panentheistic philosophical theodicy was still, like that of Leibniz, rooted in the Abrahamic religions. Judaism had two solutions for the theodicy problem. One was punishment for the sins, the fall, or the personal sins. The other was a test of faith. Both solutions were very much shared by Judaism with Christianity and Islam. The starting point of both solutions was the myth of the fall. It was present not only in all three Abrahamic religions, but in other world religions as well, and also in great philosophy, like that of Hegel and Schopenhauer, and in art, like the tragedies of Sophocles and Aeschylus. According to Hegel, the fall, the knowledge of good and evil, separated man from the animals. Without it, there would be no human history. Man became like God. The serpent had been right. But man had also to overcome this antithesis of the fall through suffering, redemption, and reconciliation. According to the book Job, all suffering was a test for the faith and trust of the believers. God declared the critical Job to be right. The Hegelian left rejected Hegel's theodicy and thus his whole system up to the present because of its theological optimism, which outraged particularly the proletariat in civil society, which suffered most in liberal civil society, being robbed of its collective surplus value by the plutocratic ruling class, the billionaires, the oligarchs. Karl Marx secularized the theodicy into his historical materialism as a science of human suffering, which declared it to be caused by the private appropriation of collective surplus labor and to be resolved by the revolution of the global proletariat. Since for Marx history was closed, the dead were dead. Most of the workers who had worked and fought for the realm of freedom on the basis of natural and economic necessity would never reach and enjoy it. Of course, Marx may have been a pantheist in the tradition of Baruch Spinoza, like so many other progressive Jews. In this case, history would remain open and the martyrized workers, even Spartacus and the 10,000 slaves who were crucified with him on the Via Appia Antiqua, could still have their day in court and be justified and redeemed and reconciled. Sigmund Freud secularized the theodicy into his psychoanalysis as a science of human suffering, which it declared to be caused by patricide and to be resolved through psychotherapy. Freud was in agreement and sympathy with and willing to accept the Marxist-Leninist experiment in Russia, the socialist revolution in St. Petersburg, but he also had serious doubts because of his biological determinism, the death drive. Even if the collective appropriation of the collective surplus labor would succeed, men would still find other reasons to kill and murder each other. According to Max Horkheimer, the founder of the critical theory and of the Frankfurt School, a Schopenhauerian like Sigmund Freud, like Thomas Mann, and like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, world history would not be understood, could not be understood, and explained without the fall, For Schopenhauer and Horkheimer, the great sin consisted in that one man sacrificed the happiness of the other man for his own. Redemption consisted in that the man was willing to sacrifice himself out of love for the well-being of the other. That was almost Christian. The Jesuit and anthropologist Teilhard de Chardin, who discovered the Peking man, wanted to give the fall a more progressive role in man's evolution toward the logosphere. But some of his Jesuit brothers wanted to prove his all too optimistic theory wrong by pointing to his most painful death through a heart attack in New York shortly before he wanted to travel to Africa for new anthropological discoveries, death as consequence of the fall. That happened in spite of the fact that the greatest enlightener, Immanuel Kant, had already made clear that man would have died also without the fall, simply because of his limited physiological structure. Teilhard de Chardin's books were printed and published in Moscow rather than in Rome because of their progressive Hegelian as well as Darwinian and Marxian orientation. For the great Marxist playwright Bertolt Brecht, man died like the animals. That put an end to the theodicy problem. But at the end of his life, Brecht lived in an apartment above Hegel's grave in the Dorothean Cemetery in East Berlin and read not only the Bible, but also the Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit, and wanted to and was buried with his wife near Hegel and his wife Marie von Tucher, as well as near Fichte and his wife. The historical materialist Brecht had not forgotten the historical idealism which he obviously negated not only abstractly, but rather determinedly and concretely. The Jewish playwright Wiesel described in his play The Night the trial of God, which Jewish prisoners arranged with prosecution and defense in the concentration camp Auschwitz. Before they were gassed with Cyclone B, invented by Fritz Haber, the Jewish father of gas war, and produced by I.G. Farben. The prisoners charged Yahweh with having broken the covenant to protect the chosen people and with having made a covenant with Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. The prisoners found God to be guilty. But then they put their hands on their heads and walked into the gas chambers. Later on, there were Jews who never prayed again, but the others continued to pray. Today, in 2022, the critical theory of religion and society asks if one can really look at Auschwitz and Treblinka and the other death camps, and at the, according to Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, 6 million Jews, and also at the 26 million so-called communist Russians who were murdered in the Project Barbarossa by 1 million Catholic and Protestant Germans and Europeans, and say that all of them were punished for their sins. Obviously not. Certainly no rabbi would do so, not even the most conservative one. The name Shoah, catastrophe, is better than Holocaust, which comes from Wiesel, burnt offering or sacrifice. Who would be the priest of such burnt sacrifice? And what would be the guilt? And what would be the purpose? The state of Israel? Today, the dialectical religiology also asks if one can really look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the 10,000 of civilians being incinerated by 2 atomic bombs, which had been developed by 2 Jews, Einstein and Oppenheimer, and ordered by President Truman and blessed with holy water by a Catholic priest, army chaplain of Polish origin, before they were exploded, one in flat territory and one in a mountainous area, in order to be able to study scientifically the different effects in different environments. Today, no still living world religion has a valid theoretical theodicy solution. That means a crisis for all of them, since to defend the gods or God in the face of the horror and terror of their world was their very purpose. There may still be a practical theodicy solution, for instance, the imitation of Buddha or of Moses or of Jesus or of Mohammed, which could give meaning to the Weltschmerz and consolation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You're
Rudolph Sieg.
welcome.
It was, as always, informative and insightful. Now we are going to Professor Dustin J. Bird. Professor, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here with everybody and to go after my doctor father, Rudy Siebert. It's always a pleasure to do so. And of course, it's very intimidating to do so, you know. So, you know, having this idea of Weltschmerz came really easy. I think when Syed Javad Miri talked to me about it and said that he had talked to Dr. Muradi about this very question, it seemed very natural because it's pervasive. I think we all know how pervasive this overwhelming world weariness or world pain is. You know, one doesn't have to go too far in one's own geographic area to talk to people who are feeling this. It's just, it's overwhelming. You know, and it's an existential fatigue with life, right? Just its existence has battered people down to the point where they are either, you know, living in this melancholic state, in this melancholic condition where they're just going through the motions but see no ultimate endpoint that's good, right? And so the Weltschmerz in that sense is an ontological mood that is pessimistic, it's depressed, it's feeling of being broken or damaged to the point of questioning the meaning and purpose of existence. Now, of course, throughout world history, this has come about many times, but we're in a very interesting point in human existence where we have to deal with these particularities that we are dealing with in the modern period and the world over. Usually when we think of depression, we think of, you know, an individual, right? So who's in a depressed state, they're succumbing to nihilism or perpetual melancholia, you know, someone overcome by the Sturm und Drang, you know, the storm and stress of living. And when overcome, you know, they can retreat into psychoanalysis, psychopharmacological treatment. They can retreat into the community that they have, if they have a community. They can retreat into religion, something that can, you know, restore their hope and optimism or temporarily alleviate their nihilistic condition. But that's on the individual level. We're dealing with it, you know, not even civilizationally, we're dealing with it globally. So what can we do on a worldwide level? Can the world seek Freud's couch? You know, can the world enter into psychoanalytic treatment, right? Can the world, with its ever increasing secularity, retreat into religion, which is always in many ways anachronistic because so many people do so based on their needs, not because they're convinced by the claims of religion itself, right? I think it was Adorno who already said that modern religion, in many cases, at least in the West, was more of a philosophy of religion as opposed to a true belief in it, right? It provides for their needs as opposed to providing for or convincing them of their claims. Can the world anesthetize itself by pharmacological means, right? So ultimately we have to ask, you know, can this global pathos, such that Weltschmerz is, be cured by any of the resources that we have, right? And these are all troubling questions, and profoundly troubling questions that we have to talk about. We have to work ourselves through in some kind of psychoanalytic way. because we have a lot at stake here, not only for ourselves, but for, most importantly, for, I have 5 children, so for our future kids, right? So when we look at the causes of Weltschmerz, right? What causes humanity to go into this condition at this particular moment? And with talking with my students, friends, colleagues, I've tried to identify a few of them. Some of them have already been talked about, but I'll bring up some of them up. So ecological anxiety is huge, especially among this youngest generation. The idea of global warming and global climate change, that it is just massively depressive, right? Which creates a sense of that there's no hope for the future among the young. So, in the West, at least, that has translated, this no hope for the future is translated into no plans to start families, right? I mean, literally, this generation is talking about, yeah, I might get married, but I'm certainly not having any kids, right? Which of course would lead to demographic collapse, which especially in the West, all Western countries have a negative birth rate, which leads to reliance on immigration to the West for what the UN calls replacement population, which causes even more xenophobic anxiety, causing more xenophobic policies and social chaos, and more extremism, especially fascism, right, comes back up in response to this because of this idea that we can't have kids, right? Why? Because of ecological guilt. So the chaos of global climate change is internalized as guilt. How can I have children and bring them into this futureless condition, this hopeless condition? And if I've already done so, have I condemned my own children to world suffering, right? There's something that they can't even do anything about, right? They can always work hard and be creative and maybe work themselves into a different, from the working class into a middle class, something like that. But what can they do about this, right, as individuals? And have I condemned my children to do that? On top of that type of condition, you have what we're all dealing with right now, the COVID-19 pandemic, which now our scientists are telling us is going to be endemic, right? It's not something we are going to defeat. It's going to be something we live with. And we can see already how much it's eclipsed our life world. I used to see Rudy every week for Saturday lunches and did this for 20 years, at least in my case. And he'd been doing it far longer than that. And that was a way of ordering my day. It was a way of rejuvenation, of seeing my doctor father, one of my best friends, my mentor, every week, and how spiritually enriching that was. And yet now, because of COVID-19, hyper isolated, right? It doesn't happen. We don't see each other. We only connect with each other digitally. It's very difficult to deal with this type of social isolation, which has now pervaded our lives, right? We have economic anxiety, at least in the US, and this might be something for those of you who are not here. This generation, my generation and the one that's coming up now, are expected to have shorter lives than the generations that preceded us. In terms of the amount of wealth that we will be able to create from our own labor is expected to be considerably less. Our health outcomes are a lot less, right? We're sicker, more tired than the generations before us, right? Because all those gains that workers have made have been systematically undone here, right? So again, young people are saying, why should I even bother to try to get myself into this? It's a no-win situation, right? So they're stuck with, am I being forced into a no-win situation, or do I completely drop out, right? So economic anxiety, and Mehdi talked about commodification, right? The having mode of existence over the being mode of existence, right? Which is, of course, famously developed by Erich Fromm, the psychoanalyst, right? That the having mode of existence is the only mode of existence that is normative at least in the Western world, and specifically here in the United States. If you want to be a being person, you're going to be socially isolated, relegated to the sidelines. Now, maybe when you die, we'll celebrate you, right? I mean, like with Dr. Martin Luther King, right? He was a person of being as opposed to a person of having. And when he was alive, he was enemy number one. When he's neutralized, then we can turn around and act like we agreed with him the whole time, right? But, you know, because at death, he can become commodified, right? When he at living, there's no way you can commodify him, right? Secularization, which goes to what Rudy was saying with the theodicy problem. People don't even want to think about the theodicy problem, so they just completely wipe it free of it, right? It's too damaging, it's too difficult, it's too psychologically painful. And so we recognize the benefits of secularization, but we don't want to talk about the costs of secularization. And the cost of secularization goes right back to, you know, already, let's say Nietzsche and the death of God, what he saw, the coming spiritual crisis of the West, and how do you deal with it? Now you can deal with it the way he thought you could deal with it, but I mean, what's that going to lead to? Something horrible, obviously, right? As it did in many cases. So science and technology, the guilt that comes about through this. I mean, again, I'm loaded with 2 computers here, and I have all these hard drives and whatnot. And so I'm participating in the over technification of the life world, right? And I have to somehow hand this meaninglessness over to my children, right? And in the stress of knowing that my 3-year-old wants to look at my phone, endlessly fascinating, right? Which already socializes him for this dependency on this little machine, right? So I mean, you got to find a balance, because they can't really exist without this, but they can't be really healthy when they're dependent on it either. And when you look at, for instance, my students, when, you know, they start to show up for class, they can have a whole class full of people and they're not talking to each other at all because they're all right here on their phone. Right. So we have this great paradox that we can be connected globally through technology, and yet we are living these socially isolated lives, right? Especially this younger generation, right? Political anxiety. Right now, democracies are in retreat, right? You have the rise of the strongman and that chaos that it brings, especially in the case where the democracies aren't functioning well. And they're not functioning well. I mean, Donald Trump was a symptom of a political economic reality that is so damaging to people's psyche, right? That's so damaging to people's ability to live a fruitful, meaningful life, that they turn to someone like him who promises to slay the chaos, right? Which is essentially what he was trying. I mean, what he said he was going to do. It's not what he tried to do, but it's what he promised. And that's one of the reasons why people followed him, because of that chaos is so destabilizing that people can't handle it, and causing more and more this feeling of meaninglessness, right? And that we somehow are moving into a tribalistic existence, a tribalistical political situation wherein we choose a tribe and the other tribe is completely demonized, right? Now, this brings a sense of meaning and purpose and a worldview and all the rest of that stuff, right? It brings all that which is missing when we fall into this tribalism. But the ultimate outcome of it ultimately doesn't help, right? Ultimately, the outcome is in itself nihilistic and only contributes to the further, society going down the rabbit hole, and only eventually furthers the feeling of helplessness and meaninglessness, right? And then, of course, at least in the West, you have a cultural change, right? And cultural change is happening very fast. If you remember in 1965, that's when the US passed the immigration bill, which allowed essentially non-Westerners to come to the US. And ever since then, you have those who have retreated into identity politics that say, no, they're not Americans, they're not us, they are, sort of like honorary Americans. In fact, the majority leader of the Senate just a couple of days ago, Mitch McConnell, was talking about voting, and he said African Americans vote are on the same level as Americans, right? He said the quiet part out loud, right? Which we all know that that's what they think. There's Americans, they look like me, right? And then there's the hyphenated Americans, and they're just kind of like sort of Americans, right? They might be citizens, but they're not really Americans, and so we have the change and massive change in culture with the influx of immigrants, and that brings a lot of destabilizing conditions to a lot of people. A lot of people like me, sociologically, psychologically, love it. I love the variety. I love people from all over the world, brothers and sisters. I have that kind of constitution. But for a lot of people, that simply is not the case. So those are just a few of the things that are causing this Weltschmerz, at least here in the US or in the West. So we have to ask the question, what is our role as academics, as philosophers, sociologists, psychiatrists, right? Psychologists, dialecticians. My time, over 20 years that I spent studying with Rudy, we often engaged in not only a Marxian interpretation of the world, but also very much a Hegelian. And Hegel is sitting right behind him there in the bust. But we engaged in a dialectical Hegelian interpretation of world events. And we would do that every day, do a time diagnosis and prognosis to try to understand what's going on. And I think one of the things that imbued in me, and at least in my analysis, was one has to deal with the barbaric, the awful, the ugly truth about human existence. And humanity's capacity to destroy and sicken and kill and all the rest of that, the night side of history, if you will. But the Hegelian optimism was always stressed as well, right? That somehow, in some cases, not all, but in some cases, there is some kind of rose that proceeds from the cross, right? So some kind of good that comes out of the catastrophe. It's not always identifiable, right? And especially when you're in the thick of it, it might not be identifiable either what the good is, right? And it's, in this case, with Weltschmerz, it's hard to even see the good that's in the cross, but it might be there. It might be veiled. It might take time to get there. But the fear, at least from my case, is that Adorno's negative dialectics, that nothing good comes out of the catastrophe, nothing good comes out of the 27 million Russians that were killed, the 6 million Jews that were systematically slaughtered, the genocides that constantly happen in Srebrenica of Bosnian Muslims, or Rwanda, or the genocides of Native Americans, that nothing comes out of that, nothing good. To echo Walter Benjamin's Angel of History, that saw all of history as one massive catastrophe. If we succumb to that, we succumb to what psychologists call the mean world syndrome. And the mean world syndrome is the syndrome where that's all we see is the mean world. That's it, right? That all of it is suffering, all of human existence is meaningless, all of the world is persecutory, all of the world is oppressive. And we forget those moments where it's not. We forget the moments where we create beautiful music and poetry, and where we have children and the tenderness of being with those children and watching them grow. And that, I think, we can easily lose because the Weltschmerz is so pervasive and so ugly. And so as dialectical academics, dialectical thinkers, we have to hold on, I think, more to Hegel than to Adorno's analysis. Now, Adorno's analysis, you might say, was for Auschwitz, which I think is very true. Nothing good came out of Auschwitz, nothing. But I think we have to return to Hegel and Hegelian optimism. Otherwise, we succumb to what the Greeks called acedia, which is a state of listlessness and numbness, where we literally handicap ourselves. We take on the pain of the world to such an extent that we can't do anything about it. We've all met people who are completely defeated by life, and there's nothing they can do to change anything. And I think, we have to remain, as Zechariah says, right? We have to remain prisoners of hope, even if we are not optimistic. Thank you.
as always enlightening and innovative and insightful. Now we are going to Dr. Turaj Muradi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sayed John. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's amazing. You know, I posed the question.
That's right.
So I can only elaborate on the question and not answer it. The answers that I just heard were so exacting and so right on the point from their perspectives, that so specialized that I couldn't relate to as much as I really wanted to and would love to. I'm sorry for getting disconnected. Are you still with me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I can't see your face, but I guess you're there, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Let me pose the question again in a detailed psychoanalytic way. According to contemporary psychoanalytic perspective, happiness is based on two pillars. One is self-esteem, and the other one is safety. And in this world that we're living in the community I'm living in, colleagues I see, students I see, friends, myself, here, other places, other countries, what I see is a persistent and pervasive depressive mood that becomes interrupted by pleasure, not joy. And I like to differentiate between those two. It seems to me that the joy that comes from the state of having a good, stable self-esteem and a good, stable sense of safety is lacking among all of us. Now, the way we understand it is this. There hasn't been enough what we call self-objects. That means objects, meaning important people around us, parents, who have served rightly for the purposes of the maintenance of a good self-esteem and safety of the self, meaning me, while I was growing up. And the question is why? Why has that happened? And why is it that now we're seeing more of the disorders that we're seeing in the community among the people around us, our patients that come to us, a prevalence of narcissistic disorders and borderline disorders, which speak to deficit of self-objects, meaning parental self-object functioning, meaning parental functions of being there to provide mirroring and to provide idealization, idealizability for the child. And therefore, there's a lack. There's a lack, there is an emotional deficit inside the child, the grown-up that we are now. And we're feeling depressed. We're feeling depressed because, one, we're not adequately proud of ourselves. We don't adequately accept ourselves. We're not pleased with ourselves enough. And second, because we're not feeling protected enough. We're not feeling that feeling of safety. We don't have anybody to idealize, to attach to, and feel safe with. Truly idealize. What Dustin explained about having had with his mentor, the Dr. Siebert, I think, that he was talking about, is beautiful. It's just what one needs when one is growing up with a father figure, for example, that one can admire and attach to and gain power from, and then become safe. So why is it that this deficit, this emotional deficit, has been occurring is something that you guys can explain. Is it that the parents are just absent emotionally because they're working too much? Is it because they can't become intimate enough and therefore they flee the home environment to find extramarital pleasures so that they can revive themselves somehow by pleasure and come out of the deadness somehow, and therefore the children suffer because the parents are not there? Is it all those reasons that you were saying, you guys were talking about, sound so right to me, that to explain why the family unit is suffering everywhere, west and east, that is producing these depressed children and present adults, or depressive children and adults, that causes us in reaction to become addicted to certain substitutes, be it work, ideology, teaching, working, extramarital relationships, in order to substitute for what was lacking emotionally and is still lacking, because we didn't get it with our parents, we're not getting it with our marriage sufficiently, and we're turning into very lonely people. What we do in order to solve the problem, person by person, not in a large scale, is go through a 4 or 5 year analysis, take our patients through that process, and what we call is introducing new emotional developmental experiences for them, whereby through the process of transference, they get emotionally what they didn't get from their parents, from the person of the analyst, to fill in the deficits. But on a larger scale, I don't know what the hell we can do. In this hell of a world. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Turaj. You forced us to reflect upon our misery.
I'm sorry?
You forced us, you compel us to reflect upon our misery. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. Now the floor is mine. I said, Dustin, now the floor is mine. So I'm going to talk myself.
Hey, the floor is yours. It's all yours. If you want to break dance on that floor, feel free.
Yeah, that I think would be much better to change the mood of like unhappiness than thinking and talking about it and reflecting upon it. But joking aside, I've been thinking about that as well. What really makes a person feel fulfilled? I remember, I think I was in the first year of my study at theological department in Sweden, in Gothenburg University. And I think one of our lecturers, one of the professors, was reading an excerpt from Bible, the story of Abraham. And he was saying something like Abraham lived very long and had a very, very struggling life. And then came to, he lived very, very long, but he died fulfilled. That why don't we feel fulfillment? I mean, the absence of fulfilled life. This is something I think needs to be reflected upon. How to encounter it. Or as Sigmund Freud, in his seminal work, which was entitled Civilization and its Discontents, he was talking about, or he tried to address the question of sources of human suffering, or what Dustin was talking about and addressing as the existential fatigues. When Sigmund Freud was talking about the sources of human suffering and why don't we feel happiness and where is the source of this discontent? Why is it people don't feel happy? He mentioned 3 reasons or 3 sources of human suffering. The first one, he says in page 24, he says, we have already answered this question by pointing to the 3 sources of our suffering. The first sources of human suffering, according to Sigmund Freud, is the superior power of nature. The second is the frailty of our bodies. And the third one is the inadequacy of the institutions that regulate people's relation with one another in the family. Then he tries to explain that how, for example, humans along the history and along even life, they realize and they try to accept the first two, or even with the aid of technological advances, we try to reduce or we try to amend some of the shortcomings or some of the problems when we encounter the nature, when we encounter the derailing and the erosion of our bodies. But the third one is something which needs to be reflected upon. And when all of our contributors, when they were addressing, we could see that all of them are talking about a dimension which actually Sigmund Freud relates to that as well. And that is the source of suffering, which its roots is not in the nature, or it's not corporeal, it's not in our body, but it is actually in the society. It is social source. And the institutions which actually make up or create these kind of unhappiness or these forms of sufferings. One is the institution of family. The second is the institution of the state. And the third one is society at large. And I think one question which comes here into mind is really what makes a person to have a fulfilled life, feel happiness or felicity. What Abraham Maslow, by conceptualizing or by introducing a very, very important concept, and that is the concept of self-actualization. And that means the different, even now we are living in different societies, in different, for example, countries and even continents. It seems the social fabric and the institutions, be it the family, be it the state, different departments, different organizations, different institutions within that, and society at large, they have been set up in a way, instead of helping us, assisting us, or contributing to our self-actualization, they are driving and forcing us towards alienation. And the source of our suffering, or Weltschmerz, or unhappiness, or lack of felicity, is in the way we have organized our collective life. For example, the way we are distributing wealth, the way we are distributing the status, the way we are distributing life opportunities, or the lack of it, and the differences between classes. So, of course, most of our problems could be understood or conceptualized or referred to the mental issues But even those mental issues, as Eric Fromm in the book called The Sane Society, he talks about, it can be related to the way we have organized our social Lebensraum or social life. The way our societies have been organized, it seems it's hampering, it's stopping, or it's creating like barriers before each and one of us in order to self-actualize ourselves. And you may ask, for example, what is self-actualization? Or how can we distinguish between self-actualization or the absence of self-actualization? Here, I think the definition which Abraham Maslow he gives us could be very instrumental. He says, each of us as human beings are consisted of wonderful possibilities. And these wonderful possibilities are not only one form, they are in plural. They are very, very diverse. For you, wonderful possibilities according to your build, according to your mental capacity, according to your spiritual makeup, according to your culture, according to many different indices, could be something very different than mine, or mine could be different than yours. So we cannot have it like a straight jacket form of self-actualization, because we have different inner capacities, inner desires, inner abilities. So the sources, I think, of human suffering in this time of the world or in this juncture of the history, regardless of different societies now we live in, is, I think, the way, or the what we may call it, using the sociological apparatus, conceptual apparatus, is how we restructure our agencies. It seems the human agency and the social structuring and the way we are actually have tried to establish the institutions around the globe. Take, for example, United Nations as an institution. United Nations was supposed to be an institution where different nations of the world after the Second World War were supposed, ideally, be united. But really, does the institution of United Nations trying, or has even the ability or the willingness or the power to unite nations around the globe? First of all, it's not the institutions of United Nations, it's the institution of states and the ombudsmans of the states, and somehow is actually representing the higher strata of power around the globe and the oligarchies of powers. And secondly, it doesn't have any vision about how to decrease the pain of nations around the globe. And when there is no, where there is no vision, how could we accomplish our mission? There must be some kind of proportion or relation between our vision and our mission. When there is no such correlation, the result would be disaster and increasing, ever increasing pain and sufferings of humanity at large in different societies. So I think by having a Freudian approach, not the Freud that has been conceptualized by received tradition, like a psychoanalyst who is trying to reduce all the pains or all the problems at the mental level or related to one dimension, even a very important dimension, which is the psychological state of human individual. This is very important. But the way Freud is trying to approach the problem of human suffering is based on three levels or three dimensions. And one of the most important dimension, which is the third dimension, where humans or collectives or human beings trying or have tried establish institutions. And these institutions, instead of producing good societies, good settings, good context, or favorable context for human self-actualization, they have actually turned into a way that's pushing humans towards alienating conditions. And this is where I think we have to focus our attention. And at the Institute for Critical Social Theory, we are hoping to address these issues through critical social theory approach, and not just based on one discipline and not only interdisciplinary, but in a form, in a very comprehensive fashion, try to understand what are the problems or what are the issues which make the human condition or pushing the people and humans towards a more depressive, more alienating, and more suffering. And how can we alleviate this? At least at first step, intellectually and conceptually, try to have a big picture beyond the boundaries of ideologies, I don't know, like nationalistic aspirations, religious, ethnic, denominational boundaries. Try to see human being as a species which has come so far, and try to reflect upon our situations in a critical fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so I think now we can open it up to discourse and discussion, if any of the things that came up.
Yes.
So I pulled up when you were talking, Sayed Javed, about Unbehagen in der Kultur, right? And the uneasiness in the culture, civilization is discontents. I pulled up my notes because I've been teaching Freud for this last year.
Yeah.
And I added one thing because you had his three sources of suffering, and I have a question there that I made me think of, and that is, can we add a fourth? And that is some kind of forgive me, I have to say it in German because it comes out of the Lutheran tradition, but the Anfechtung, right? This spiritual afflictions, right? I mean, is that something that, in the modern period with, with materialism, both crass and scientific materialism, that we've reduced everything down to simple material existence. If it doesn't have material qualities or properties, then it doesn't exist. Right? And has that somehow undercut or undermined the ability for modern humans to believe that there is something worth living for other than material, the material acquisitions or things like that? Because I think that type of worldview, even if you don't, you know, explicitly ascribe to it, it somehow infests people, right? And to a certain extent where, you know, and maybe prior times, at least in the, you know, prior to modernity, people might have struggled with a theodicy problem, for instance, but yet they nevertheless still believed that there was something beyond this, beyond the horror and suffering of nature and history. They still had that hope. They could hope and believe in it. Where now today, I think even people who identify as strong believers still have that doubt, you know, that nihilistic doubt that somehow they're trying to cover up by the explicit and sometimes overwhelmingly public belief in religion. Can we ascribe something like that into it?
Yeah, but you know, the interesting thing, or maybe the ironic thing about Freud is that when he's talking about how to overcome this discontent, he talks about religion, but he considers religion, or if we try to say, for example, religion is one of the source of spiritual aspiration of humanity, but he considers it as an illusion. So if we are looking at it Freudian, we will get into trouble.
Right.
Because when he talks about religion as an illusion, although he admits that this illusion has been one of the great inventions of humanity, which contributed to the flourishing of civilization, but it is an illusion, and it cannot be continued now at this juncture where science and technology has actually emerged. So where does the spirituality, or I mean, if we are trying to look at it Freudian, spirituality, what does spirituality means for Freud? If illusion or the knob of religion is illusion, it's like a mirage. We know that there isn't any water there, but still we see it as water. So for the masses, this illusion was good, functioned very well. But now with the modernity and these technological innovations, scientific worldview, and all the changes and the modern education, mass education, which has uprooted the masses from that like religious background or that grounding in the traditional religious worldviews. So maybe actually what we are now experiencing as nihilism is part of actually the blessing of science, or the scientific worldview. It's better to put it in this way. So I think here again, as Mehdi mentioned something about Shariati, Ali Shariati is talking about this dilemma as well. He says, we are now at the juncture where people around the globe, especially in the West, in the most affluent societies, they will not succumb, or they will not accept a kind of worldview which is called religious worldview, which is pre-scientific. And if you are going to present to them, as for example, many in the Muslim world or in the eastern part of the world, be it India, China, Japan, Iran, Arab world, or Turkey, whatever, they try to present them a scientific vision of religion. They're trying to say, like Sir said, Ahmad Khan, okay, here it says something in Quran or in Bible, okay, let's put this aside, demystify that, and try to give a pure, like a religious worldview which is compatible with science, or the attempt by, for example, Baha'i faith trying to give a very pure scientific vision of religion which is compatible with the scientific worldview. Shariati says this doesn't help the man of today, the humanity today, which is actually experiencing anxiety, angst. So what we need as intellectuals, global intellectuals, try to help and contribute at the global level, regardless of the boundaries of nation, religions, denomination, is how to address that quest of humanity. And that is a kind of worldview which is post-scientific. And that is where we try to get inspiration from Iqbal. Said we need a worldview which has actually the scientific ethos in it, not trying to relegate that, but a spiritual or spiritual interpretation of the world. And religions, traditional religions, could assist us in building that. But now here comes the question, how not to fall in the trap of Salafism or fundamentalism, or as you put it, for example, fascism. How not to fall in that, but don't even fall in the trap of scientism. So we are actually in danger from two sides. Here is the side where we try to go towards scientific interpretation of religion. Doesn't help, doesn't actually content the human quest. And the other side is the fundamentalistic, like Talibanis or trying to Salafist interpretations, which tries to tell you, to the human beings of today, the golden age was in the past. No, the golden age is not in the past. Now is not a golden age. As Fukuyama was trying in 1989, 1990, said that liberal society has accomplished the goal or the telos of human aspiration. So after the collapse of Soviet Union, the liberalism will conquer the world, and humans have arrived at the level or at the society they were always aspiring. No, the golden age is not here. This is not the ideal. Whenever we say we are in the ideal, we have killed our ideals. There is always an interplay between the actual and ideal. We cannot say we got the ideals. When we say we are personifying, we have already realized the ideals. That is the day one of tyranny. That is the day one of despotism.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. One thing I wanted to say is that that might be helpful in some way for us to differentiate between true happiness, joy, and pleasure. Is differentiating between ego and the self, and talking about spirituality. You know, spirituality and going back to spirituality and going back to religion and going back to God and believing in God and being connected to God or being connected to something after life, or which is all about safety, okay, gives us a sense of safety and comfort and connectedness, would work only if this connection to spirituality is done from the self, not from the ego. And the cardinal condition for that is if we have overcome our traumas, our childhood traumas. If we have not overcome our childhood traumas, we may go toward spirituality, we may go toward intellectuality, we may go toward whatever work we do, okay? But it will only feed our ego, because our self has been split off and has gone into hiding because of the trauma. And we can only grow our ego. Whereas if our self has not gone into hiding because of our childhood traumas and is present, it can interact with any object, whether it's a person, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, whether it's spirituality, whether it's God, whether it's religion. It can benefit, whether it's a book, it can benefit and be enriched and thus become joyous, truly joyous, as opposed to our ego, which in a way substitutes for the self after trauma. So I'm saying this in order to suggest a reorientation, a possible reorientation of the group, our group discussion. If we want to approach it analytically, if we want to find an analytic, a psychoanalytic approach to happiness, and as far as connecting to other disciplines and using them also to help to bring about a help from your schools of thought that to our thinking would work. If your schools of thought provide suggestions that feed the ego, we think it wouldn't work. We think it would only cause temporary pleasures instead of joy.
Thank you very much.
May I say something?
Yes, go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's a, Dr. Maradi, that was a wonderful distinction between joy and pleasure. Frankly, I never thought about that. However, let me just say this, that I think that distinction could be applied to just about every aspect of life. I can speak for this country. I'm sure in Iran and China and Japan and Europe, that's also perhaps maybe in varying degree applicable. We have no capacity to really pursue joy because everything has been turned upside down. We have found ways to substitute, as you alluded to, pleasure for joy. So I don't have any meaningful interaction with my coworkers. I don't have any meaningful interaction with my family members. I don't have any meaningful interaction with my neighborhood. I'm just saying me as an individual, not me, but you understand. So what do I substitute for that is pleasure, right? I don't have the joy of belonging to a community in a meaningful fashion. Therefore, a six-pack or a bottle of wine or a marijuana joint come to rescue, right? That's the pleasure that is substituted for that absence, which is the big absence, which is joy, right? A sense of belonging, a totality, it's an organic fashion that it can address all my beings, all my dimensions. That is true also of religion. The fiasco of religion, okay? Al-Shariati has a book called, a thesis called Religion versus Religion, right? Historically, he traces the evolution of religion as has been practiced and the ideal religion. And I think Sayed alluded to that we really cannot reach the ideal, but at least we have to strive toward making reality or pushing reality closer to ideal. In this country, we had people who slept with prostitutes, who racked millions, if not billions, living in almost $1 billion mansion, yet they also preached the word of God. So from the point of view of consumers, right, all of a sudden this thing explodes all of a sudden, and this guy said, oh my God, all along I've been duped, I've been fooled by this clown forcing me to believe in something that he himself didn't believe in, or said things he didn't believe, like for having, for instance, a golden toilet, they're somehow saying that because God wants him to have it, or this preacher who recently spent, what, $75 million on a private jet, again, because he's in a hurry to go spread the word of God. Now, it can't be like ordinary people taking, commercial planes. But the point is that we have now, in many ways, bankrupted the social institutions that could have been helpful to us. We've been in many ways pushed to a direction that either taken an antagonistic approach, or in many ways sort of indifferent, sort of. I don't give a blank about any of them, right? That kind of approach. And so what is to be done? That's the question. What is to be done? If we really want to address the ills of society, the social problems, right? Not the individual problems. We need to concentrate on social solutions. At the level of individual, we can do a certain amount. As a psychiatrist, you can help me, the individual, at that point, right? But you can't help everybody in society. So for you to be able to helpful in terms of larger society, then that has to enter public policy. Identify the causes of the problem and then take measures to solve those problems. The problem is that we have social problems. We're always seeking individual solutions. Joe, the six-pack that Marcuse was so eloquently pointed out, it's a good example of that. The worker who comes home with a six-pack will need to pacify himself. To really, ostensibly, it's a joyful thing for him, drinking, having, relaxing. But the fact of the matter is that's a symptom of a larger social problem. I remember when people were being laid off in Detroit. I don't know if you were old enough to remember that, Dustin, but, the workers were laid off, and then what do? They went and start praying. They send a preacher over there to help them deal with this. And I'm thinking, my God, false consciousness to this extent. Nothing against the prayer, but to actually trying to pacify them, not to resort to any kind of social action to change their condition or prevent further deterioration of their problem. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, joy and pleasure. And you see that all over, really. In terms of in education, the joy is not there to learn. The joy is the pleasure of getting a good degree, getting a good grade in a class, and just on and on and on. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, can I speak?
10 more minutes.
Most of
our session will be terminated. Yes, Dustin.
Yeah. Can I say? First of all, I want to thank everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Muslim, go on.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say hello to everyone. I am proud to be here. I am a good friend of Dr. Mili. He's my supervisor, and I am proud to be here once more. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much.
Great to have you.
Yeah, actually, I'm from Russia. Yeah.
Muslim actually is at Chita State University in Siberia. We met first time in 2006, about almost 17, 16 years ago. Yes, and he's working at actually his field of research is international relations, and hopefully he will join us at the Critical Institute of Critical Social Theory soon.
Thank you very much.
Здравствуйте, товарищ. Как дела?
Yeah, хорошо.
Actually, my nationality is English.
Oh,
English.
English.
Yeah, but I'm a citizen
Хорошо
of
говорите
Russia.
по-английски.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So you know, I have a lot of friends here in Russia, and businessmen, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and to say so, all of them, they are frustrated in the whole. And Muslims, unfortunately, also. But they are too religious, of course, but Mr. Jawad absolutely is right. Many of them are going to another world too much than to be in this world. I think this problem that people, they want to be, they are thinking about the heaven more than about existing in our land. But if they find the balance between this world and that world, in that way, they could exist. But I noticed that some people who are too religious, for example, I had one, not friend, acquaintance, he's a Muslim, and one day he told me, I can't wait the end of this life, just to pass away and to find the heaven in the next one. And by the way, he was a really young man, about 27 years old. I asked him, why do you think so? Because I myself, I'm Muslim as well. Why do you think so? Why you can't enjoy your life? Why you can't substitute these thoughts here? But he was so frustrated, and I guess it connected to his family. I guess this question, which is connected to family, is very important question. Because if his parents were too radical, or maybe too pessimistic about this world, or maybe they were oppressed by somebody, they are bringing this man in such a way. So he's complaining about this world and he wants to change something, but he is not strong enough, and he is not, I guess, he is not motivated to change it. So he's waiting, he's trying not to make sins, just to pass away. And this is the simple way to run away from reality for this religious man. Right. For the other people, for the Christians, for the, by the way, Christians, majority here, as for Russia, they are Christians by name, to tell the truth, because the atheistic movement from the Soviet Union affects a lot on that people. So these people from the Soviet Union, they are thinking more pragmatic. These people, they think that if they could resolve their problems with the help of psychologists, they could live further without any troubles. And I had one friend, he's a big businessman, and each day he had different consultations and different treatments with the psychologist. And that psychic every day was trying to treat him, and of course, taking money from him, you know, big money. And I noticed from day to day, he was finding and was looking for new problems for that man. I told him one day, what are you doing? He's just squeezing you. He's just taking money from you and withdrawing. You are like a wallet, nothing more for him. But he replied, Muslim, you have religion, you are a religious man. As for me, I'm just by name, I'm a Christian. I have money, and this psychologist, he's a religious person for me. So I think that if this man would be abroad in the family, which would be more religious, but without radical ways, I mean, like Salafism, of course. Let it be Christianism, let it be Judaism, but not that way where it is without spirituality. Because this man, he was spiritless. And one day he went, and by the way, this man, he's a rich person, but he's very unhappy. One day he was having a party with his friends, and they were, just running away from the reality with the help of alcohol, as usually it happens here. So, his friend told him, why are you so unhappy? He replied, I am not unhappy, but, just I feel not calm on my heart. And that guy said, do you have a flat? Do you have an apartment in Moscow? He said, yes. So what's your problem? You have an apartment in Moscow? No problem. So I think, you know, just all our problems, of course, in our mentality. But I have a question to you, gentlemen, how to live in the prison when you think every day that you are in this prison? Thank you very much.
Can you repeat your question, Muslim?
How to live in the prison with understanding that you are living in the prison?
We have to ask Rudy. Rudy should answer this question.
How to overcome this?
Find meaning in life.
Yeah, because every day when you are thinking about this prison, like that Muslim man, that Muslim who always was looking for the heaven, it's impossible to live. I guess maybe I hope he's wealthy, but I don't think that it's so, because you know, just it was about 10 years ago. Every day he's thinking about death. That's why no, I guess it is impossible to live in the prison, to be a prisoner, understanding that you are a prisoner. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yeah. And sorry for my long speech.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know,
if you have no question or no intervention, we can say the day off.
I'd like to share some of the data related to you know, the agony of individuals and communities around the world, if it's okay.
Yeah, can you send it to us by email?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, can you see this?
Unfortunately, I can't see it because I am on the.
Oh, you are? Okay. Can you see? You know, here's. Let me read it out loud if you don't mind. In 2020, here's the point: all the problems, you know, of the world and individual communities. There is utter helplessness. You know, Muslim says something about, you know, living in a prison, and don't feel like you're the only one. That there are millions of people, and some of them, in fact, have reached a point of no return and have taken their own lives. Here are some data. In 2020, over 1 billion people had some form of mental illness. In US alone, 40% of adults reported some form of mental illness. That is, of course, without intervention, that could accelerate and develop into something much more dangerous. America's shadow epidemic, as called, the mental illness crisis that we have in this country. Shadow epidemic, and nobody wants to talk. There is still a taboo about, you know, talking about mental illness. Traffic deaths due to intoxication, bad roads driving, or low driving cultures, 1.4 million globally. 2020, there were 241 million malaria cases, 350,000 deaths. These are in all poor countries. 40 million people with diabetes, 4 million amputations. In the US alone, 185,000 amputees. Major problem, and one of the problems, of course, is affording insulin. Commodified healthcare system is one of the consequences of it. Is this one? Suicide, over 1 million deaths. 10th leading cause of death in the US. Millions of deaths due to opioid addiction. Last year, I believe we had 68,000 deaths due to opioid addiction, painkillers, alcohol abuse, illicit drugs, food poisoning, prescription drugs, by the way, that kills more people than illicit drugs, antibiotic resistant diseases, homicide, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, I thought I'd just share that with you. And we have more data, by the way. At some point, maybe we can reflect on these and try to find the root cause of the problem.
Rudy, did you want to add something before we close it down?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Rudy?
Thank you very much.
Did you want me to say something?
Yeah, do you want to say something before we close it down?
Okay, well, we have developed, you know, in the last 50 years, our critical theory of religion and society. And two things we did, like the Frankfurt School, we combined Marx and Freud. So what about that? To have the psychoanalytical side, but to connect it with Marx's social analysis. Marx didn't have a psychology, and Freud didn't have a real sociology. So to combine the two, as Marcuse did, and Adorno did, and Reich did, and so on. So maybe that would be a way. As far as religion is concerned, both of them, I think, Freud and Marx, have negated religion abstractly rather than concretely. That means to ask if some elements in religion, they certainly have to be negated. But if there are other elements which maybe could be translated, and it has been done already. So the neighborly love has been translated into solidarity. And are there more of these values, which, like the golden rule, into the Kantian imperative and so on, have been translated already? So may that be a way that one combines Freud and Marx and all their followers, and then at the same time, religion criticizes the world criticizes religion. So could we then maybe concretely negate or concretely determine religion by sure that superstitions and all that, with the Enlightenment movements, that we reject this, but that at the same time we are open for progressive values which are there in religions, which could correct all these illnesses which we have described today. So that I would like to make this addition to it. Yeah. So to leave the world like a monk or so, and sleep in one's coffin or so, these are extreme developments at the borderline of psycho problems and religion. So, but as a dialectical solution to the whole thing is to correct Lenin or correct Marx and so on. And there are beginnings in them. For instance, Marx may have been a pantheist and not an atheist. So, and he has positive things to say about religion more than Freud. So, but could one apply methodologically determinate negation rather than abstract negation of religion? Then one would satisfy the longings of the enlighteners, which are correct and true, but one could also be positive about some sides of religion as well, which we do need in order to keep our mental health true.
Can I ask you a question? You're suggesting that we address this at the level of individuals or at the level of institution?
Well, Freud would be individual and Marx would be institutional and collective and so on. So to combine the antithesis of individual and collective, and combine also the antithesis between religion and secularity and enlightenment.
Okay.
Yeah, and
we have
something what Dr. Muradi was talking about in terms of transference of giving the analysts and different type of experience that they never had, for instance. We can tie that right back to Freud at the very beginning of psychoanalysis with the Wolfman. I don't know if you've ever seen this book, but this is about Wolfman 60 years later, after his time with Freud, where he basically says Freud was the most useless thing and the best thing. Why? He said, because his analysis did nothing for me, but him being there for me, listening to me, almost like an ersatz father, being a real intersubjectivity. That's what helped the man. And I think, in this modern day with the modern technology, that's one of the key things we're missing, is that true intersubjectivity.
Yeah, let me maybe add to it. There is this antagonism, of course, between the religion and the secular, and it's not from today. It is 500 years old at least, and it goes deeper and deeper, and it continues to go deeper and deeper. But there are, on the secular side, there are people who want religion to disappear because of all its negativity and so on. And but there are also modern enlightened people who are still somewhat open to the religious side. We have fundamentalists in all religions who say no to modernity and to enlightenment and so on. But we also have religious people who are open for the advances of modernity and willing to listen to it. So that we came up with this type of a solution. Not only that there was once a time when reason and faith were one, but also that as we go through this antagonism, there could be a possible reconciliation, maybe under new psychological and new sociological conditions.
Thank you very much.
You're
Hope
welcome.
to see you all again in another August roundtable.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being with everybody.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Have a good
Thank
day,
you.
everybody.
Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Ma'a salama.
Take care of
До
yourself.
свидания. Au revoir. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye now.
Bye.